This week on Theater Talk.
I'm glad Julia began the synopsis of the whole thing by saying she's flunking, because she is. Unfortunate.
Someone chooses the grades.
Someone.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
Florence Ziegfeld was certainly the greatest producer of his era and may in fact have been the greatest producer of all time. He is the subject of a fascinating, delightfully written book, Ziegfeld, The Man Who Invented Show Business, written by our good friend Ethan Mordden. Welcome back to Theater Talk after too long an absence.
Thank you.
You've been working on this book all these years.
That's where I was.
All right, the subtitle, The Man Who Invented Show Business. What do you mean? How did he invent show business?
When Ziegfeld started, his first Broadway show was 1896. The show business as it was nothing like what we now call show business. It was an entertainment industry. It was much smaller. It had two different races. There was the white time, as they called it, and the black time, for instance. Totally separate venues, separate people, separate audience. It was a completely different construction than what we know now. And when Ziegfeld finished with it, it was what we know now in a slightly more primitive form.
And what does that mean? Democratizing it?
Well, for one thing, he ethnicized it. Yeah. He was the first producer, not one of the first, he was the first to integrate, racially integrate Broadway kind of thing. And it was so daring at the time that even though he had many imitators, no one else imitated that aspect. But it wasn't just a racial, white and black. He also ethnicized it. He brought in Jewish comics. He brought in Will Rogers. You don't think of him as ethnic, but he was 3/8 Cherokee.
Yeah,
and
true.
It was a mixture of the styles and the attitudes of these different ethnic groups pushed together into the Follies that changed really the way the audience expects its entertainment to run in America. It became really the melting pot entertainment that we now know today, where everyone brings his own styles.
And the other thing, too, when you just hear the word Ziegfeld, one thinks of big, lavish, spectacle entertainment with lots of girls. That's his invention as well?
To a certain extent. When he came along, there were spectacles and there were the modest shows. What he did was bring the spectacle aspect into the modest shows that he was at first producing, so that the ordinary shows that you expected to see, maybe a star or two, often not, plain old scenery, often so functional that it was ordered off the rack, like the costumes and so on. He spent money on those shows so that they became special in themselves. They became novel. There was nothing like that before. You either went to a spectacle in a spectacle theater for the purpose of spectacle, or you went to whatever else there was. He brought the visual excitement and often the surprise of some visual twist or something odd going on. For instance, I think it was Ziegfeld who invented the notion that the dance that followed the song should key into what the song was about. Before him, that never happened. You'd sing a song, and then you'd go off, and the dancers would come out, and they'd dance. Then the book would continue, and then someone else would sing a song, make him or herself scarce, and out would come the dancers. Now, sometimes the performers did the dance themselves, but it had nothing to do with the song. It was just a dance. So Ziegfeld has his first Broadway star, Anna Held, sing, for instance, A Gown for Each Hour of the Day, because she was very dressy. So this is the heroine's wanting song. In later shows, you get Waitin' for My Dearie, or even Some People in Gypsy. But Anna Held wants to dress better than any other woman on the planet. A gown for each hour of the day. Actually, there were only 6 gowns, so it was a rather short day. And she would dance in and out in these quick change gowns. And the girls were there, too, helping her along with the song. But the dance was about fashion. That never happened before. And then there's the dress parade. The girls go like this, and the girls go like that. And the critics say, it's done with strings, it's done with lighting. They're perfectly ordinary girls. No, they weren't. They were special girls because they were all his dates.
You also talk about his life in great detail, very fascinating, his marriages, first to Anna Held and then to Billy Burke, and constant philandering goings on at the New Amsterdam where he had his offices. How did you get all this dish?
Well, actually, a lot of it is dish kind of thing, passed on verbally from generation to generation by people in the theater to people like me who are writing about the theater. But also, luckily, Lincoln Center Library had all the boxes. They had the Ziegfeld boxes, the Anna Held boxes, the Billy Burke boxes. And the odd thing about those boxes is, unlike the rest of the holdings in the library, which are phenomenal, they're not cataloged. It's just box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4. So you never know what you're going to get. So you open up the box thinking, my book, at last, here it is. And it's somebody's bank statements kind of thing. But another box will have, let's say, the first act of a script to a show that everyone thought was lost for 70 years.
It's so interesting in your book, you say a key to understanding Ziegfeld is where he grew up. In Chicago. He's not a New York boy.
Right.
What is the influence of Chicago? What is happening in Chicago when he was growing up that turns him into this great showman?
Well, actually, I think the main thing is Chicago at that time was a city of immigrants and the children of immigrants. So obviously, Ziegfeld saw it as it was his experience, but the American experience is you get all these different people from different parts of, I was going to say the world, I suppose different parts of Europe, and that's your life experience. Why not put that on the stage and bring these people? Remember, too, he started just after the main wave of immigrants. The parents were busy assimilating themselves, learning English, and just staying alive. But the kids were the achieving generation, Fanny Brice, Eddie Cantor, and so on. And they're now able to think in artistic terms. They can go on the stage. Their parents are busy paying the rent, kind of thing. And Ziegfeld is familiar with this kind of thing because of his background in Chicago. If you were growing up in Chicago when Ziegfeld was, which is, he was born in 1867, in the 1870s, 1880s, more than half the people you came into daily contact with spoke English, if at all, with a very heavy accent. It really was an immigrant's city. Much more so even than New York.
New York was interesting. And then key, though, also is the World's Fair and the Buffalo Bills Wild West show. Because Ziegfeld grows up with a father who is the head of a big classical music school there. He played the piano himself. He could have had a very sort of, if you will, upper brow kind of classical training and been more genteel. But is it Buffalo Bills Wild West show that gives him this kind of love of the old showbiz stuff?
It's not clear where it came from. I think he was a very, very, very independent man. No one ever told Ziegfeld what to do. But he would never have fights with men. Anyone who got in his way, he'd just walk around. Just proceed on his own path. Everything he did was according to his lights. The one thing I would say, the one gesture he would make toward what was generally thought of as the correct thing to do was he befriended millionaires because he knew money and power protects you. It's very, very useful for someone like Ziegfeld, especially since in those days producers put on shows with their own money and he was always broke because he was an addicted gambler.
Yes, I want to ask you about that. That gambling was serious. I mean, this was a man who made and lost vast fortunes.
Yes.
And where, do we have any sense where that came from? That gambling
No,
addiction?
that we don't know. But can anyone explain where a gambling addiction comes from? It's not genetic.
It's always a part of
cultural.
showbiz with these guys, though. I mean, they take big bets on stuff that could just
Well, the
fall
thing
apart.
is, it's not interesting to say, you know, in the Funny Girl movie, he plays some sort of card game with their mothers, and it's like a penny a point or something. That's not what addicted gamblers do. It's only interesting if they can lose everything or win everything. The man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo is what they want to be. Guess what? Never happened in the history of the world. No one ever broke the bank at Monte Carlo. The bank always wins in the long run, and he was always broke for that reason, even though he made fortune after fortune after fortune.
It's interesting, though, we don't know very much. We seem to know a lot about Ziegfeld, and yet he remains a remote, aloof, mysterious human being.
That's the way he wanted it.
Really?
Yes. Again, I don't know whether that was deliberate or it's the poker player in Ziegfeld. You know, when you play poker, you don't explain how you're going to play the 2 of spades and the 3 of spades, and you don't explain what you're going to get from the deck. You just play the hand. That's how he lived his life. He just played the hand. He never explained anything to anybody, which made it a little tricky.
As a biographer.
Yes, because he didn't say it, but luckily he was surrounded by people who left autobiographies.
Yes, and you describe him in such articulate detail, interpreting so much of his life, and I'm fascinated, but I didn't really like him. You didn't describe to me what was a likable person.
Well, he may not have been liked, and a lot of people disliked him for various reasons. For instance, even though he was generous with his performers, even before 1919, the equity strike that finally forced the producers to recognize the union, even before that, he paid more than most people did for his chorus, and especially for his showgirls kind of thing. On the other hand, it was the opposite for the writers. You would have to sit in Ziegfeld's office hour after hour because he's late with his royalty checks, and there are the usual excuses from Goldie, the loyal secretary. But if you waited long enough, sooner or later he had to come out or jump through the window. And when he came out, you would be there, and it was that kind of thing. So a lot of people, Richard Rodgers hated him, did 2 shows with him, just hated that Ziegfeldian chaos, because that's how he worked. He didn't work methodically. He wasn't the Hal Prince kind of producer where, let's consider what this is, and the module will turn like that, and Sweeney Todd goes like this. And remember, Angela, to look at Sweeney, it wasn't like that. It's, let's make it. Let's throw everything out there, and we'll start to see what we have. It's like sculpting, you know, with a piece of rough, wet clay.
But
And you know, you look at a number, for instance. I don't like the costumes. Cancel that number. The costumes, the lighting, the music, everything goes.
Else.
And put something else in there. There was no chaos like Ziegfeld chaos. I mean, there's no chaos like Broadway chaos, but on a higher level is Ziegfeld's chaos. And Rogers could not stand working that
on the
way.
other hand, Irving Berlin enjoyed him. I mean, Irving Berlin was very much, give me the check, and what song you want, I'll give you the song.
Some people really liked him a lot. Maybe because he favored them. He and Eddie Cantor and Will Rogers were very, very close. Those two. Yes, he was close to Irving Berlin. And maybe it was because they never had any problem about money. The main thing about Ziegfeld was he spent the money. And everybody knew that.
Right.
No matter how difficult he was, Follies chaos, Ziegfeld chaos, glorifying girls in his office. Not only that, he was spending much too much to make the show fabulous. Yeah. You know, in showbiz, there are two ways to do it. One way is to be very, very budgeted and to spend just this much so that if you only earn this much, you have succeeded.
Right.
Another way is to spend like this. And your show is so good, everyone, it's the Gone with the Wind syndrome. No expense spared. And I will produce the greatest movie Hollywood has yet produced, and everyone will have to see it 2 or 3 times.
And we have to remember that Ziegfeld was doing this year after year. I'm going to produce the greatest Follies you have ever seen.
How do you top the Follies, though, when you've already had the greatest? In 1919, everyone said it's the greatest Follies, and yet there were, 10 or 12 more.
One of the many things I like about this book is you really give us a sense of what it was like to experience a Follies. What was a Follies like? What did it look and feel and sound like?
The main thing was, it was more or less all-star, which was very unusual on Broadway. There literally were like 4 or 5 headliners, though no billing. No one ever got star billing in the Follies. They did in his book shows, but not in the review. Also, even the supplementary people were the best people possible. And there was this, what I call surprise and delight. You never really knew what you were going to get, and the thing flew past you like crazy. The idea was as soon as one sketch ends or one number ends, the next one is already, the curtains are closing, and the 2 guys who are going to sing duets while the stagehands change for the next big number are already coming into place. In those days, that was very unusual, which is why most plays were one set. Most musicals even were one set per act, or a set, the traveler curtain closes, you do a little something in front that no one cares about, then you can open because the next set is ready. By the time Showboat came along, it's true, you could have pretty much as many sets as you wanted, but you had to write a show with these crummy little worthless scenes in one while the sets were being changed, which makes it difficult when you revive them because you have to get rid of those because those don't really add anything to the show.
Right.
Every now and then, however, Kerner Hammerstein will drop some nugget in there, and then you don't know what to do
because
you can't. The story won't make sense without it. So that makes it difficult. But he was cutting edge in his day, although he was never thought of that way. They would talk about the Ziegfeld touch. Well, that's the way to avoid knowing what it really was. Or they would talk about his exquisite taste. It wasn't taste. He knew talent. Follies was the biggest opening night at a time when opening nights really mattered because all the critics went on opening night. It wasn't scattered the way it is today. Plus, the fancy New York people who wanted to be in on the latest thing, or the potential latest thing. Biggest opening night on Broadway. Year after year after year after year. How long can it keep going on?
And in the end, it doesn't, and he dies broke.
He dies broke, and no one even knows how he died. I mean, what he died of.
That's right.
My theory is he just exhausted himself.
Fascinating. It's a fascinating book. Ziegfeld, The Man Who Invented Show Business, by Ethan Mordden, out from St. Martin's Press. Thanks a lot for being our guest tonight.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you.
And I don't understand. I don't understand what anything means. And I walk around from morning till night with this one thought in my head. I'm stupid.
No one thinks you're stupid.
No, what am I?
There's a fine revival on Broadway now of David Mamet's very controversial play, Oleanna. The play was done, I believe, in 1991 off-Broadway. It still has resonance today. It is magnificently performed by our 2 guests tonight. We are joined by Julia Stiles and Bill Pullman. Welcome to Theater Talk. And congratulations on these fine performances in this play that has everybody, when it's over with, leaving the house feuding over the issue of whether this woman, is right in taking down the professor that you play. Julia, can you sort of sketch in the character you're playing and whether you think she's justified in destroying a man's life and career?
The questions that I have to deal with justifying this character are amazing. Well, I play a college student who's flunking his class, and she comes unannounced. We've kind of made up on a Friday afternoon or, at the end of the week to get extra help. And she insists she insists that he not be distracted and that he spend the time with her to help her understand the material. And then after their interaction, she comes back and she's filed a complaint against him and tries to make him not get tenure, and then things escalate from there. But in terms of justifying her behavior, I mean, at this point, I try really hard not to be objective about the play, because you can't, now that we're up there and doing it every night, you can't second guess every choice that you've made. And there are things that I do like about my character, because I've had to find that. But I think we try and take it as as a tragedy, as a theater piece, and try and not think so much about the political side of it as we're performing these people, and try to make them fully formed human beings, as opposed to archetypes.
Is this play, Bill, though, about power, really? Because it begins with you, the professor, having all the power, and then it shifts, and the power moves to her.
Yeah, it's probably architecturally, about that kind of thing, but I always find those, just a play about power, I don't know if that's enough, especially when it's, galvanized by male-female and generational, and all those things are operative in this context and university, and what is language and all those things. But, and also I think about the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, what people, if they are wanting power or wanting vengeance. I think it's as much about betrayal and retribution as it is about power. But I think underneath it, it's a very personal story, and this was our approach, for better for worse. We wanted to take this play, which had become kind of a thesis play, of Mamet's, And Doug Hughes said Mamet has 3 really great plays, American Buffalo, Glengarry, and Oleanna. And that was enticing to Julia and I, because we could see it not from the baggage of yet another mouthpiece for Mamet, but this, you approach like any play you would approach. You see nuanced characters, you see their damaged sides, and the sides in which they're idealistic.
And the big issues are for the audience to deal with, not for you as the actors creating real human beings on the stage.
Right. I mean, the events that unfold in the play are not, obviously not something that we can change, and so the decisions that we have to make, especially I think I do, is that as you say, she's taking down her professor, but there are incremental steps to get to the end of the play. It's not, it's not for me to decide. Well, it's not for. I have my own interpretation of how that unfolds, and it changes sometimes nightly, because depending on everything that's led up to the end of the play.
When Mamet wrote this play in '91, we were beginning of the political correctness obsession at university. It was flourishing, and you do feel that Mamet has a grudge, some kind of. The playwright's coming from some kind of. I sense he really dislikes your character, Julia. And the thing that's,
Poor Julia, she gets beaten up.
And the feminism and the misinterpretation of certain actions of men that feminism can represent. But somehow you have made this more sympathetic. At the same time, you've made the character, oddly, more bumbling than I remember originally being, and thus your character becomes more sympathetic at the same time, because you're more of a victim. When I first saw Bill Macy do it, you kind of understood the woman taking him down, whereas with you think, why is she doing this?
And isn't that too easy? Like, I think that actually is a really interesting choice on Bill's part.
Exactly.
Is that
That's exactly.
If he were like a arrogant skirt chaser and I were this militant feminist, it'd be too easy to go to side with one of the two of us. I think we deliberately tried to sort of play against what is obviously written in order to make it more challenging for the audience.
I did see the production that David's wife, Rebecca Pidgeon, did with Bill Macy. And your performances are both very different, because they're more human. I mean, there's a softer side to this woman in your interpretation than I remember in Rebecca's. And as Susan says, there's real doubts about what's going on in your life as a middle-aged man at this point. You're not the imperious, all-powerful professor. And this was a deliberate choice on the part of Doug Hughes, the director, to make them less archetypical and more human?
Yeah, and I don't think that I or with Doug Hughes's direction was trying to make her softer, because one of the things that I love about Carol is that she really is unrelenting in a way that, you know, in polite society doesn't really happen that much. But rather, like, to flesh out the hints that David Mamet gives us in the writing about where this girl is coming from.
It's all, you know, there's this thing of both of us, why are we in the room? You know, why do we stay in the room? Why do we come back? Why does she come back? You know, so, and those are all things which people go, oh, I know about sexual harassment. I would never do that. And I'd always open the door. He's a jerk because he didn't open. But, you know, all those things are kind of like, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking. And I think these two people are in incredibly pressured kind of points of their life. And they happen to, it's a Friday afternoon. He's trying to get out. He's trying to buy his first house, you know, which is late in his life. And he's finally trying, and she's flunking a class that she feels that she needs to get a grade. And I'm glad Julia began the synopsis of the whole thing by saying she's flunking, because she is. Unfortunate.
Someone chooses the grades.
Someone. I thought I almost had her there. I was ready for tonight's performance. Like,
the question, though, is, I mean, it's so difficult to ask you to interpret this stuff, because people can see this play and have just different opinions about it. But the way I saw it was that there is a sexual attraction that you have for her, and that is reciprocated to some extent on her level. I mean, is this something that's just personal to me, or do you play this?
Well, I think there's one thing that has to be very clear, which is when I say the touch was devoid of sexual content, she doesn't say, you're a liar. And a lot of people read that stuff into it, and I think misread the play. And it would become muddied if I was groping her at that moment and then go, oh, I'm a slimy douchebag that actually now I'm not owning up to it. That's not Mamet's play. Yeah. So there is the fact that you have two people that are in the room together that are willing to stay for a long period of time, that there is some kind of compelling chemistry.
There, yeah.
And some of it is that they've both been damaged in some ways, in similar ways. And there is an antagonism that is actually kind of a chemistry.
But to say there's some kind of chemistry is almost taking the man side of it right away. Because, of course, in this play, when you have the first scene and then the second scene shows us that the male and female have completely had a different interpretation of what happened in the first scene, the female interpretation as presented was, I had no sexual chemistry, you brought sexual chemistry to it.
Mostly patriarchal chemistry.
Yes, patriarchal chemistry.
Patriarchal, which is, I guess that's a kind of sexual thing, Susan, unless, I don't know what you've been doing lately. But
don't ask me, I'm not touching the patriarchal one. But
that's one I'd have to think about.
All right.
No. Not from the woman's perspective.
Right. Are you, the character you play, is she attracted to this man at all?
I think it's deeper than any sort of sexual chemistry. I think it's more about confiding. She's ready to. She finds something that she can trust about him, despite all of her distrust, and then there's something that she's going to tell him, and then, you know, because she doesn't get to, there's that feeling of being let down, and that's not just me inventing it.
No, I think that's the key moment in the play. I mean, I think that what you're saying is absolutely right. That she does find in you something sympathetic she hasn't come across before, and when she's about to open up, you answer the phone, you turn away, you close it down.
There's a way that people can connect that is much more, that can make the two of us much more vulnerable than just a sexual chemistry.
I think that you know, we intentionally were a little heretical about approaching a Mamet script, and you know, we knew we were going against the dictums that have been out there. David puts them out in his books, and everybody has this idea of Mamet-esque. And we were going against that. And one of those things comes from this fact, which is, you know, the kind of thing you don't normally do in Mamet, but he was getting a divorce when he was writing this play. Yeah. And there's a lot about this play for us that is a personal play that's actually quite domestic, about two people who are unrelenting in their sense of at a certain point, me and definitely her, of having been betrayed, yeah, and having not getting the other person to see your side. And using everything in your power, whether it's reason or just sticking with your reason, more sophisticated than that, but you know, that says that this is what we're doing. And so at times I feel as intimate, I feel like sometimes we're incredibly intimate with each other in our anger and in a way that we fight that audience members don't get to be that intimate with their spouses.
We got to wrap it up, but I do want to ask you just something you said there. You had the heretical approach to David Mamet. How did David feel when he came in to see you doing something that, you were doing on your own? As you say, he's written all the stuff in books. He pretty much tells you how to do the job.
We didn't have a lot of contact with him, but fortunately, he has been incredibly supportive of this. And and he would let us know if it weren't. And I think that's a sign. We're very lucky to work on a great script by a great American playwright, and I think that's why we're glad that we're out there. And he has the wisdom, I think, to see that this production is telling a story. It's serving his play.
Oleanna at the John Golden Theater, extremely well acted by Julia Stiles and Bill Pullman. Thanks a lot for being our guests tonight on Theater Talk.
Thank you.
We'll all agree to disagree.
Yes.
You cannot not disagree on this play. This is what makes it compelling, dramatic, interesting evening in the theater.
Yeah.
There, put that on the side of a bus, David.
Look, you're going to make... no, look. There are norms here. And there's no reason to... Look, I'm trying to save you.
No one asked you to. You're trying to save me? Do me the courtesy to...
I am doing you the courtesy. I'm talking straight to you. And we can settle this now, right? And I want you to sit down, all right? Just sit down.
Excuse me?
Sit down. It seems that we just... Wait a moment. Just do me the courtesy.
Let me go.
No, I have no interest in holding you. I just please, hey,
Let me go.
want to talk to you.
Let me go. Would somebody help me? Would somebody help me, please?
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.